Hey, hey, we're live. It's happening. Grade school is on. It's kind of moody in here. Let's turn some lights on. Can you guys see and hear me okay? What's going on with y'all? I missed y'all. I had a frustrating last couple weeks because we've been sick at my house, and I don't love being sick. I especially don't love when being sick gets in the way of me doing stuff I like to do, like hanging out with you guys in grade school. So I'm really glad to be back with y'all, and glad to be back in full health, and glad to be a little bit better lit than I was a moment ago. How is everybody? Let's get up in the chat. Let's see what's going on. Well, let me turn my... Oh, look, you guys are looking at my whole lighting app here that I use to turn on these lights. These lights in my room are... I'm actually really happy with these. It took me a while to find them, and they're the perfect lights for me. Now I just need a way to control them with something other than a slightly janky mobile app that somehow just runs on my computer as well. Hashtag wishlist. Okay, now that that's done, I can take a look at the chat and see who's here. Okay. What's up, Paul? Hey, Tim. Glad you're back, buddy. Or glad I'm back. Oh, Sam Rogers. There's a wild Sam Rogers in the house. Cool. Good to see you guys. I know we were a little bit late getting a public link out, so I imagine our friends will be joining us as we go along, but I'm excited to talk about anything at all in the world of color grading today. We've got one topic that is kind of top of mind for me that I happened to drop into a conversation thread on Facebook about, which doesn't happen a whole lot, but I was glad it happened for this conversation because there was a question about my exposure chart and about its behavior. So, Nicholas, I was hoping you would be here to join us for this chat. I am sure you'll join us at some point, but I kind of want to dive in and talk about this exposure chart thing that we were discovering, because Nicholas was essentially asking some questions about the exposure chart that I have a sneaking suspicion are not the only time these questions have been asked. Has anybody ever looked at the exposure chart and wondered, wait, how do I just get a straight up linear ramp? Oh, and by the way, we actually do have a brand new version of the exposure chart that supports different resolutions other than 1080. Not a huge update or anything to it, but it does have support beyond 1080. Let me get this thing turned on for now, and I'll show this to you guys while everyone's finding your way in. Get your questions ready. Anything related to color grading or not really just color grading. I won't talk about smoothies. I might talk about coffee. Mostly color grading. Get your questions ready. We're AMA today, whatever you guys want to talk about. Okay, let's take a look at this exposure chart. Oh, by the way, my friend Gadali is here with me. Although he's here in spirit and in my ear, I think probably louder than he's going to be in your ears. So I will do my very best to remember to repeat Gadali's questions, or to repeat the questions that Gadali is already repeating to me, so that we can all hear the questions and so that we're not playing a really, really unfun form of Jeopardy here today.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And share your screen when you're ready to go.
When it's time to go. Yep. Gadali reminds me to share my screen, and today will also be reminding me to repeat the questions so that people are not going, wait, that sounds like a very interesting answer to a question that I have no knowledge of. Okay. Here's my screen. So the question that Nicholas was asking, and I might be paraphrasing a little bit, but essentially I think the confusion that Nicholas was encountering was like, hey, if I look at your exposure chart and I look at my steps in these different tone curves, even before I apply anything, the steps aren't even. Like, why am I not just seeing an even ramp here? Isn't that what I should get if I have a linear ramp of values? Like, why isn't that happening? Has anybody ever had that confusion or wondered about that yourself? I'll let you answer to yourself. Well, we're in YouTube lag mode, so I won't wait for my broadcast to catch up to y'all and for y'all's answer to come in. But I have a hunch, like I said, that Nicholas is not the only one who's had this question. And what we ended up talking about with Nicholas is that this exposure chart is essentially set up to model photometric stimuli as opposed to just giving you a static kind of unity grayscale ramp like we often use here on the channel. Something like this, right? So like what we're doing with the grayscale ramp here, this is just to give us a baseline to compare the change that a process or an operation imparts. What we're doing here is modeling photometric stimuli. And photometric stimuli, and in particular stops, don't move in neat, tidy, even linear intervals. In fact, they increase exponentially. So if we look at our 0.18 here, this is the exact math that probably made Nicholas, he was sorry that he asked the question because I typed it out in our little Facebook conversation that we had on one of the Resolve forums this past week, where we're looking at what happens if we start to add stops based on an 18% gray starting point. Well, one stop up from 18% gray is going to be 0.36 because that's 0.18 times 2 to the power of 1. That equals 0.36. If we want to go 2 stops up from there, we're going to take 0.18 and we're going to multiply it by 2 to the power of 2 because stops work in powers of 2. So now we're up to a 0.72. That's a pretty decent click up. And if we look at let's just simplify our ramp a little bit so that we can visualize this, and we'll start counting off to our right here. Let's maybe do 5 values, okay? So we've got 2 below and 2 above. So 0.36, now we're all the way up to a 0.72. We're already starting to take off, but now what's going to happen? 0.18 times 2 to the power of 3. That's going to be a 1.44 approximately. Am I getting that math right? Yeah, 0.36, 0.72. Yeah, 1.44 roughly, right? Then we're really going to take off because from there we're going to go all the way up to a 2.8, and then we're going to go to a 5 point something or other, and then 10, and then 20, and then 40. So you can see the numbers get really big, really fast, and they don't have the same space in between each step. They increase exponentially, right? So I thought that was a fun opportunity to just sort of re-emphasize something that it's funny. When I was building my very first versions of this exposure chart years ago, kind of as a programming exercise in DCTL, I actually found that confusing, and I thought, oh, I must be doing something wrong because I'm setting this up to work in stops and it's in linear, so shouldn't it be showing roughly a straight diagonal line? And that was where I sort of relearned this lesson myself. But the other thing that I thought was fun here that is an interesting thing to observe is, again, right now I'm not in any color management at all. I don't have anything happening here at the timeline level. I'm just applying my exposure chart. Here's what's interesting about working in log spaces. If we move into a log space, all of a sudden our intervals are going to start to become pretty darn even. Now, log C3 is not a pure log curve. In fact, none of the common grading camera log formats are a totally pure log curve. So it's not quite as simple as saying there's pure perfect intervals between every stop. But once you come off of the floor, these intervals are going to get pretty predictable. And this is in fact one of the sort of properties of a log curve that make it useful to work with, or make it more intuitive to work with, because no matter what my current value is, if I move my offset wheel by some amount, I'm going to increase the exposure of that image by the same amount, regardless of what the base value of my image is, or of my mid-grade pixel is. Does that make sense? Compare that to when I'm working in linear. If I am really, really high up in exposure and I add some linear gain, I'm going to get a different level of response than if I'm really, really low down and I add that same amount of linear gain. Whereas if I add log offset, I'm going to get the same response, the same exposure increase, regardless of the brightness or darkness of the value in general of the original underlying pixels. Does that make sense? Maybe that's total review for all of you guys. I know I've got some pros in here, but always fun to revisit the basics. So Nicholas, if you're here now or if you're reviewing later, I hope that our conversation this past week was interesting, and I hope this was a nice kind of cherry on top of it to round out the conversation. And I guess maybe the last thing that I'll point out before we move on from this is just the scene and sort of exposure modeling side of things. This says nothing about what we're going to do when we start mapping out to a display. And when we do that, things are going to get even more complicated. This is where we're going to get our signature S curve, where we've got flare compensation and surround compensation down below, and we're rolling those highlights that are climbing really, really, really high, as we saw in linear. We're rolling those so that there's less difference in between them as we get out of the midsection of the curve, so that we can perceive difference in the highlights and so that the highlights feel like they have shape, even though our display does not have near the dynamic range of the world that we're walking around in. So that's kind of the second part of it. And that's why, again, a stop that is positioned here is going to receive a different treatment through this output transform than a stop that is positioned here. These stops are going to be compressed closer to their neighbors. These stops are going to be allowed to remain more separate from one another because we're in the sort of linear or straight line section of the output S-curve, if that makes sense. Okay, that's enough about exposure charts. By the way, the exposure chart 1.4, which I don't have handy in here at the moment, that's now available. So if you guys want to grab that, if you've ever had any issue with like using the exposure chart in timelines that are not 1080, that's what 1.4 addresses. So not a big update, but a helpful one if you're doing UHD or using smaller resolutions than HD, whatever the case may be. Okay, Gadali, does anyone want to talk about anything interesting?
Why, yes. I have a few questions. Nicholas is wondering if you could talk about best practices around tone mapping on an input transform. And reminder to repeat the question.
So Nicholas is wondering about best practices for tone mapping on an input transform. Here would be what I would say. In a perfect world, we would not have to tone map on our input transform at all. I want to stay in my grading scenario. Like I'm going to give you guys this example. Here's actually the shot we're on right now is a really good example. If we look at, if you were to do a geeky exercise and look at, if I decode a red camera, this is red log3G10 is like my native space here. If I decode this camera into, if I decode its log3G10 curve, a value of 1 in log3G10, what linear value am I going to get out of that? I don't remember off the top of my head, but it's high for log3G10, higher than a lot of other log curves, like well above 100 is what I'm going to get back. So if I'm looking at moving from log3G10 into DaVinci Wide Gamut Intermediate, DaVinci Wide Gamut Intermediate, if I were to do that same exercise, take a log DaVinci Intermediate value of 1 and decode it to linear, the value I'm going to get back is an even 100. That's how high I can encode into a 0 to 1 range within DaVinci Intermediate. So what happens with that extra headroom in the log3G10 that isn't in DaVinci Intermediate? Check this out. If I do a grayscale ramp here, we can see what happens. Let's turn off our output transform. We got a little bit of clippy clip there, right? Can you guys see what I'm talking about there? That's clipping in. Now, best practice would say, let's tone map like so. If I could say luminance mapping or DaVinci, and you can see now it's going to take that and kind of roll it in a little bit. Oh, by the way, quick commercial break. If my family hasn't already given up on me, Mommy, Bridget, Connor, are you guys watching? Have you long ago given up on me with the attention spans that you guys have and the other agenda items that you do? If you haven't, I love y'all. I'm glad you guys are here. Love you. Okay. Back to our regularly scheduled programming. So if we take a look at our tone mapping here, on paper, this would be a sensible thing to do because this basically ensures that my original scene dynamic range is fitting into my working space dynamic range. But I'm going to throw you guys a curveball here. I'm going to put it this way. One of the things that we should be thinking about, or that someone helping us in our decisions should be thinking about when we decide on a working color space, is what's the maximum amount of like luminance that I feel like I need to be able to work with, knowing that I'm ultimately going to be mapping out to either SDR or HDR, which is very limited in terms of its dynamic range, right? DaVinci Intermediate, as we said, I get to a linear value of around a 1. That's, or excuse me, of a 100, right? Not around, actually exactly 100. That for me is perfectly sufficient. There are no values above 100 that I feel like I need to maintain and preserve and shape and roll in coming from camera. So as a result, because I've chosen DaVinci Intermediate as my working space, and because I've decided, hey, I'm good with the peak of this container, I don't need to preserve or have access to values that are above that peak, I'm not going to worry about rolling things in with edge case cameras like this red, which by the way is an edge case. Most other cameras are going to fit inside of that 0 to 100 linear range that DaVinci Intermediate provides for. The red is a bit of an exception. And this is where sort of like synthetic evaluation and assessment can lead us a bit astray, I think, because when you look at this, it seems so obvious. You're like, oh, well, clearly I would want to roll that in. But I think in practice, what's more important is that I, when I'm grading, have access to the original relationship of the pixels. Does that make sense? I don't want things to be compressed or rolled before I've even gotten to put my hands on them. I would rather lose data out the top of a well-chosen working curve than to start to compress things before I've even gotten my hands on it, because I want to have access to the camera original sort of scene linear data, if that makes sense. Even though I'm working in a log curve in the case of DaVinci Intermediate, it's still describing a linear relationship between the pixels. It's still describing the original relationship that those pixels had to one another, or that those values had to one another out in the real world, if that makes sense. So that's kind of a long answer that we could sum up by saying best practice for tone mapping on your input transform, I would say it would be not to tone map whatsoever. Select the right working color space, and if you have an input space that has actually got more room than that, then let it clip out the top and be okay with it, or decide that you need to go and pick out a different working space.
Let's see, Waleed is wondering, is it correct to add a LUT in the last node?
Waleed wants to know, is it correct to add a LUT in the last node? Well, there's some details that we would want to fill in there. In general, it's not wrong to add a LUT in the last node. And maybe kind of connecting to what we were just talking about, I would prefer to add something like a LUT, assuming I'm using it for some sort of nonlinear behavior. That could be a creative LUT, it could be a technical transform LUT, but it's probably going to be doing something curvy and going to be like destroying the linearity of my original values. That's something that we can say generally is going to be better later than earlier. So it's a very broad question, but I would say in general, yeah, that's pretty sensible. One caveat that I might put there if we're talking about working in a color managed framework would be, I would generally prefer to do a LUT here, upstream of my output transform, than here. Lots of reasons for that, but maybe the simplest one is that if I'm going to all this trouble of color managing and then I add a LUT here after I'm in display space, that means that I don't have an ability to reproduce this image in an equivalent way in another color space, because this LUT is one that I'm selecting and deciding I like its appearance on only in my particular Rec 709 color space. Does that make sense? So just in that specific example, I would want my LUT to be designed to work here and to be placed here, so that if I want to change my target here, let's flip over to one of these days we got to talk about output transforms here, but it's a bit geeky for grade school. For now, I'm going to go back to my stock CST here. And what I was pointing out is that if I want to later switch this to some other output color space, that's easy to do. Like let's just flesh this out here. Let's look at, I don't know, let's do one of my Voyager essentials. We'll go with Hypatia. And if I want to flip this to P3D65 ST2084, I can, because this has already been set up. This is operating in my working space, and now I'm just targeting a different output space. So hope that's a helpful general answer there.
Alexander wants to know your thoughts on using offset for lifting exposure compared to HDR wheels, global or linear gain, since the behavior of the black point is different.
Yeah. So Alexander is asking about my personal preference for using offset versus HDR global exposure versus linear gain for performing exposure adjustments. It's funny. I feel like I've like changed my tune a lot in the last couple of years here. Let me just get a color grading tree kind of built out here. Like I've kind of bounced around a lot, and part of my bouncing around on this topic has to do with like I'm working on this advanced panel down here now, which like I like having 4 trackballs, and I like having one of those essentially being an exposure trackball. But I'm going to say after having done a foray into like, oh, maybe offset for exposure isn't so bad, I think it is so bad. It really, really is, as we talked about in a recent video, it is not giving a proper uniform linear response across shadows, midtones, and highlights. Obviously Alexander is pointing that out as well. So my preference is for some sort of linear gain operation. That can be done, and this is a perfect example because the shot needs to be exposed up. You can do gamma linear, set this node, the gamma of this node to linear, and now right here within your primaries, you have the ability to increase your exposure, right? And I can go over here and in a separate node, work on my contrast adjustments, something like so. So that would be one option. The other one that you could do that Alexander mentioned as well would be just going over to your HDR wheel and hitting your global exposure. That's going to be like identical to it. And just to give us a quick visual on it, check this out. Let's say this will connect up to our conversation about the exposure chart earlier. Right now, I've got this node set to linear, and let's say I want to go 2 full stops up from where I am now. Well, that's going to mean I need to take my input, that's a 1, and multiply it by 2 to the power of 2. What's 2 to the power of 2? Anybody remember math class? I didn't think about or perform any power function operations or exponent operations in my head for like 10 plus years after I graduated high school, and then I got into color science. The answer there is going to be 4. So we're going to boost this up to a 4. This is 2 stops brighter than it was before, like so. Let's just make sure that I've got my color management set up properly here, which I do. So I'm now increasing this image photometrically 2 stops using linear gain. Now let's reset all this, turn our gamma back to use timeline, go over to the HDR wheel, and let's just say 2 stops right here. And let's compare. Identical, right? No difference at all. So these are actually the same thing. The HDR global wheel is actually doing linear gain. And as a bonus, it's already working in units of stops. So these are all like awesome things. Literally the only reason why I don't tend to use this as much is because it's in another palette. And I just don't like the extra with, think about as like, if I'm not going to do anything else on a given shot, the one thing I'm pretty much always going to do on any shot is touch exposure and touch contrast, meaning I'm going to have to start in my primaries, bounce over to my HDR, make my adjustment, bounce over to my primaries, make my contrast adjustment. That's like wasted seconds that add up in a big way because I'm going to do that on every single shot I touch on every single project that I grade. So that's the only sort of downvote that I have for the HDR global wheel. Other than that, it's pretty perfect. And the other fun thing about this that makes me wish that it was, you know, like you could just like design your own custom like tool palette or something like that, is like if I could have this right here, because I'm not having to flip this node into linear, that means I can maintain the other thing that I have been liking about grading so far this year, which is doing everything in a single node. So I could do something like this HDR global operation, and then I could work my contrast as well and continue to have everything sort of self-contained inside of this prime node, if that makes sense. So that's my preference. I tried, I gave you a shot, log offset, and you just didn't get the job done. And in fairness to log offset, as I mentioned earlier, all of our like common log curves, camera log curves, and like grading log curves, they're not actually pure log curves. If they were, we wouldn't notice that misbehavior in the shadows nearly as much. Quick example of that before I shut up about this question, but this is a fun one for me. Let's turn this off and let's compare what we did the other day when we were talking about our exposure ops. Let's compare doing log offset like so, where we can see these shadows are going to start to fog as we get hotter. Okay, watch this. I'm going to flip my gamma not to linear, but to another log curve. I'm going to flip it to the ACES CC log curve. Watch what happens to this image. If I look at the result there, I should actually be seeing, let's go back here. I was expecting to see a more uniform sort of tightening of the shadows than I did just now. Yeah, I mean, I'm cheating now because I'm adding more ops into the equation. What I'm trying to emphasize or illustrate is that log curves that are a more pure log curve that don't have a linear section down in the bottom actually are going to perform better in general than the type of log curves that we use more commonly. ACES CC is an example that's on a short list of such log curves. Most other log curves that we work with have a sort of linear or a cut segment that makes that behavior in the toe, really is the cause of that behavior in the toe in terms of like things fogging out or milking out faster than they really should. So there you go. I hope that's interesting.
Adam wants to know, why is the white point for Rec 709 D65 when most digital camera sensors have a native white point of 5600?
Ooh, that's a fun question. So why is the white point of a display D65 when the white point for most camera sensors is 5600? I'll be honest with you, I actually don't know for sure, but I have a decent guess as to why that is. I think it has to do with hardware and with manufacturing and with getting the brightest image that you can. My like blind intuition would be that it's D65 because we can get more energy out of the average screen at a D65 white than we can out of a D50 white, for example. I can't prove that, and I won't like go to bat on that because I'm literally just guessing. But that would be my guess, is like that white points are selected. I know theatrically, like with the DCI white point, that's true, that was selected to make the most of the lamps that are driving projectors like that. But I would imagine it's a similar thing with emissive displays, is they're really just trying to optimize for the hardware. And we could zoom out for sure and say that that's certainly why we've arrived at D65, is in an effort to optimize the performance of the hardware, as opposed to like the legacy scenario on set where we're looking at a daylight temperature of 5600. That's a convention that is arrived at from optimizing film negative, where we're trying to figure out like, okay, what is a sensitivity that I can engineer into this film negative for daylight that is going to get a proper, that's going to like interact with daylight properly and is also going to allow cinematographers to get exposure and to get proper colors as easily as possible. So that'd be kind of my couple of broad guesses on that topic, but I actually don't know, and now I'm quite curious to dive into the exact history there. And I know it like I'm also curious about like, it's not the same in other countries. Like, this is my favorite fun fact. I used to like this colorist I worked for years ago, who had been a colorist in Japan for many years. I felt like a little kid. I was like, tell me about the time you were a colorist in Japan and you had to grade everything to D93. That's the native white point in Japan. 93. It is the bluest thing you can imagine. Like, let's look at D93, for example, for a quick second, just because I wanna. And let's mix things up and go to a fresh image here. Oh, I don't know which of these. Let's look at, isn't it funny? I prepped a whole new practice project. So I was like, I'm tired of looking at these same old images over and over and over again, these same old test images. But now it's like exactly what I'm wanting to see. It's just a boring test image. Okay. This has been placed into its proper group. Yeah, so check this out. If I, at my timeline level here, if I just say I'm going to do a chromatic adaptation, let's go from D65 to, do y'all even have D93? They don't even have D93. Highest they go is D75. Okay, we'll all have to imagine in our mind's eye, or take Colin's word for it, that D93 is comically blue, and it is comical for me to envision a colorist grading to that white point and just getting normalized to it. Anyway, hope that's helpful, at least some initial ideas for thinking about or doing some further inquiry into.
What do you do when there is banding in your camera's footage?
What do you do when there's banding in your camera's footage? That's a good question. I'm trying to think of the last time that I encountered that. I also don't think I have any images that are going to exhibit banding necessarily in here. But here's what I would say. When you have banding or any kind of artifacting in your image, I mean, actually, maybe some of the Sony stuff. Let's have a look here. I feel like some of these are more like noise as opposed to banding. Let's put a LUT back on these. And let's put these. These are all Sony clips. I'm just going to add these into my Sony group, and then let's see if we can uncover some kind of artifacty something. Maybe up here in these clouds. Let's also take a look at our, I've got one too many groups here, but that's okay. Yeah, if we look up here, yeah, that's kind of like, that's not exactly banding, but it's definitely funky, right? Oh, this needs to be, okay, never mind. That was an incorrect tone map that I had, so it's actually okay. All right, I was hoping I could find like a sort of hands-on example to demonstrate this on for you guys, but I would say when you're getting banding in your image, the first thing to take a look at always, anytime you've got something undesirable happening in your image, you want to like return to the principle that I talk about in the Colorist 10 Commandments of first do no harm. Let's make sure that you're not doing something to make that problem worse. That can be as simple as incorrectly setting up your color management. It could be something that you're doing in your grade. There's all kinds of places that that can come from, but that's the first place that I would start, is making sure there's not a look or something else in your pipeline that is causing the issue. And let's look here. I'm just going to expose this down a little bit. Maybe. Can you guys tell how often I'm in the HDR global palette? Yeah, bank global. That sounds good. There it is. Okay, so yeah, the first thing to do is just double check your color management, make sure that nothing funky is happening there. Double check whatever LUT you're using, make sure that that's not causing the issue. If it's just in there, and if you're just seeing it, it becomes like highly like case dependent. It just depends on what's going on in that shot and what you feel like you can do to remedy it. If you're seeing that banding in high color, like high chroma areas, which is often where you will, something that I like to do is play with my curves, specifically sat versus sat or lume versus sat. And essentially, like, again, it's going to be highly dependent on like your specific context, but a good general shape to try for these, I'm still holding out hope that I can find an image. But no, these ones are all nicely shot. What about some of this crazy ass night stuff? What if we just like juice the exposure on this? Is that going to bring out some banding? Nah, just noise. Yeah, so what I was pointing out with these control palettes here is a good general starting point for these is just grab the right and drop it in either one or in both. And then what you can do is observe your image and look what that's doing. And you can kind of create like a shoulder here so that you're, what I'm doing in both of these cases is in this case, I'm rolling off saturations as things get brighter. And here I'm rolling off saturations as things get more saturated, if that makes sense. Those are usually the areas where you're going to see banding. Sometimes it's in the very low end. If it's in the low end, it's actually a little bit easier because you can like throw a power window on that and like gamma it down or pull some saturation and just sort of kind of try to like shove it under the bed, if that makes sense. But often where you see this banding is going to be in bright and highly saturated areas. And when that's the case, what I would do is look at one or both of your lum versus sat and your sat versus sat. And like I said, just start with a simple grab the rightmost control point and drop it down. And then you can create a shoulder as you need to so that you're affecting what you need to that's probably going to live more on the right side of the graph without over affecting skin tone and other stuff that's going to live more on the left side of the graph. So that would be some things that I would look at trying out there. The other thing that you can, of course, try as like a last resort is just straight up noise reduction. You can do this. I mean, you could do noise reduction in the form of like the noise reduction tool. You can also do like a straight up blur, like throw a power window on that area and blur it and then maybe regrain it. That would be something like, we'll kind of have to mock this up, but you know, like you could do something like this. Like let's say this is our problem area. Do a nice big soft window, or maybe it's over here, like so. And then you can do some blur. By the way, blur tends to look really nice and linear. So just flip that gamma over there. You could blur this like so. And then I'm going to add a new serial node. I'm going to pass this key forward like so. And I'm just going to add a little bit of grain. Not necessarily to like so that I can stylize this part of the image, but just so I can make it feel like it's got a little bit of texture like the original negative did. See what I mean there? I'm sure this is hard to see over YouTube, but if I go off and then on, I'm at least maintaining a little bit of texture here. And I could go tighter with that texture if I want to do like a 35 mil. And I could, of course, bump this up. So that could be a good recipe too. Window, blur, and add texture. Or, as I was originally going to point out, you could just throw your noise reducer at it from here. And again, you could do this. I would do spatial here over temporal. I generally prefer spatial over temporal. Do the radius small if you can, medium if you can't, large if you have to, and kind of feather that in that way. And this is the same thing. You can limit this into a window if you want to. Say like, oh, I don't need to noise reduce his face. I just need to noise reduce whatever's happening over here. So those would all be good options and sort of like principles for navigating banding in your material.
Ryan's wondering if you can explain the difference between tone mapping with DaVinci and tone mapping with Luminance, and when would you use one over the other?
Yeah, so looking at the difference of tone mapping between DaVinci and tone mapping with luminance mapping. So I keep meaning to like do my own dive on this and sort of like look at it a little bit more forensically. I have it on good authority from a community member who I trust that luminance mapping is trying to be what we could call chromaticity linear. Basically, it's looking at the hues of the image before it does anything, and it's remembering those, and then it's applying the luminance mapping of knocking things down or shaping things, and then it's remapping those colors that may have moved back to their original values, if that makes sense. So I imagine we would see some sort of difference with the two schemes here in this red. And I'm seeing precious little, probably because it's not bright enough. You can see like the vector scope is shifting ever so slightly. That's like the curve is going to be the same. Like here's a good visual if we just look at the ramp. I believe these curves are going to be the same. Yeah. So it's not the curve shape that's changing. It's how this interacts with the colors. How this is a 1D operation. What's changing is how what the 3D operation is that's happening as part of this process. Like how we're getting from, like this part, DaVinci Intermediate to Gamma 2.4 with these tone mapping settings, that's not changing. But what is changing is how we're getting from how we're managing colors as part of that compression journey. So that's kind of like the broad answer, but I tend to use luminance mapping, like I've shared with you guys before, not out of some like diehard, like, oh my gosh, it's just clearly always better, but just because like it's been around longer than DaVinci, I'm pretty sure. Certainly I've been using it for a really long time, and that was what I was introduced to early on. So it's just kind of what I use when I'm using resolved color space transforms at all, which is these days not a lot of the time. That's something else, like I said, I kind of want to bite off one of these days in grade school that we really haven't, but looking at other ways to get out to a display besides a resolved CST or an ACES ODT. But within the resolved CST, I sort of default to luminance mapping, and DaVinci is just going to give you a slightly different treatment of your colors in those areas that have been compressed by the process. I mean, actually, let's see. The person I was referencing earlier, who is my quote-unquote good authority, is Thatcher Freeman, our resident color science guru and builder of cool DCTLs, including his RGB chips DCTL, which you can get for free from his GitHub. And if we look at like this, actually, this one might not even be the one. Let's look at, I think it would be there's another one that I want to look at. By the way, Thatcher, are you here today? Gadali, is Thatcher in the house?
He is.
Oh, what's up, buddy? You're sitting here laughing. They're laughing at me because I'm taking so long to pull this up. It's not the smoothness chart. It's the ramp. Let's see. RGB chips. I don't know why it's not popping up for me right now. What I'm wanting to look at is a luminance ramp. Although this will actually be fine. This will probably demonstrate the difference synthetically if we look at luminance versus DaVinci. Yeah, there you go. So you can see here is my original RGB chipset. This is again, this DCTL free download from Thatcher's GitHub that I highly recommend. And here you can see treating this like so, where we're getting this luminance mapping and getting like so, where we're getting DaVinci. So there's like sort of a synthetic difference. And now I'm wondering if my dad brain is working correctly. I feel like I'm looking at a hue preserving scheme here versus here. So I think what I originally said before is wrong. DaVinci would be the hue preserving one. Luminance mapping would be the non-hue preserving form of it. But these kind of charts are really fun for evaluating like more subtle differences like that. And that's kind of like a good way to evaluate the different tone mapping schemes here. And you can even look at like, here's the saturation preserving, which is like pretty easy to see, like, well, whatever that is, I don't think I want that. But between those two, that's a nice visualization of the difference.
Austin wants to know, how can I create a LUT that is designed for a DaVinci Wide Gamut color managed workflow?
Ooh, fun. So Austin's asking, how do we create a LUT that is designed for DaVinci Wide Gamut? You guys want to know a dirty secret about LUT design? We just wrapped my my advanced show LUT design course about 2 or 3 weeks ago and had a blast in there. But a freebie, a cheat sheet that I can give you when it comes to designing LUTs is designing LUTs for a particular color space. It's as simple as working in that color space. That's really all there is to it. Like, let's turn everything off here in my working space for a second. And let's say I want to design a LUT for DaVinci Wide Gamut Intermediate right now. Well, I'm in luck because I'm already working in DaVinci Wide Gamut Intermediate. I'm mapping into there from whatever my camera metric is, and then nothing else is happening currently. So if I design, I don't know, let's do a very, very simple LUT here. I'm just going to take my DaVinci Wide Gamut Gray, and we'll do a custom curve anchored around mid-gray of my DaVinci Wide Gamut space. You guys have seen me do that a million times. We'll go low in the toe, high in the sky. Maybe it's something more like that. That's a little strong. This is also like a very odd image to be building a look on. I should know better. Let's see, this is 198. Let's just build this on something a little more sensible. I'll make sure this is in my log C3 group. There we go. Okay, so we've built a really simple curve here, okay? Let's say we want to cook this out as a LUT. All we got to do is turn everything off that we don't want included in our LUT, like so. And then I'm just going to go in and I'm going to generate my 65 or my 33-point cube, whatever it might be. And that will be a LUT that works in DaVinci Wide Gamut Intermediate in the same way that this operation works in DaVinci Wide Gamut Intermediate. When I built it, it was taking a DaVinci Wide Gamut image in, and when I was finished, it was not leaving me, it was leaving me in DaVinci Wide Gamut Intermediate. It wasn't like meant to be getting me out to display space or anything like that. So that's like the dirty secret for designing in any color space, is you essentially just need to set up your working environment in that color space itself and make sure that when you generate your LUT, it's not including elements that you don't want included. Things like an input transform from area log C3 or an output transform to Rec 709. That's the baseline of it. Now, what you do in this node, how you build that LUT, the tools that you use, and what you're trying to accomplish, that's a whole big other topic. That's the muscle of look design that we talk about so often here on the channel. But the foundation of it is like, yeah, you just work in the space, design in the context that you want the eventual output or the eventual creative transform to function within, and you'll be good to go. So that's the idea there.
Diego's wondering if you ever make exposure or color balance adjustments to a camera original before it goes through a CST that transforms into DaVinci Wide Gamut.
Ooh, fun question. Diego's asking, do you ever make a color balance or exposure adjustment pre-IDT, upstream of your input transform, before you move into your working space? No, absolutely not. Why not? Why don't I do that? Because if my working space is causing problems, even like rare problems that can only be overcome by pre-treating the image, I don't have a very good working space. That's my contention. Like a good working space, by definition, should allow me all of the freedom that my original camera space had. The only reason I'm using a working space at all is to get everything into the same unit of measurement. So if I have cam A is a Sony, cam B is an Arri, and cam C is a Red, I want to be working with all those images inside of the same color space so that inches are inches and feet are feet, right? But if that working space in any way is clipping or clamping or causing like problems or like feel-based things that are giving me trouble, that's a poorly chosen working space, and I'm going to pick a different one. So for me, no. I'm really glad that question came up, because that's like almost like a fetish in color grading that I see so much of. Like it's sort of part of like a lot of colorist secret sauce of like, well, here's the branch of my node tree of stuff that I do before the IDT. But for me, I'm like, why do you have a working space at all if you're not using it 100% of the time? That's the whole point, is that everything happens inside of a working space, that everything can happen inside of, and where every camera has the same common metric. That's the only advantage of it. If you're only using it part of the time, it really doesn't, its merit starts to slip for me pretty quickly. So thanks for coming to my TED Talk. No, I don't ever do stuff upstream of the IDT.
Grant is wondering if you calibrate for SDR at 100 nits or brighter based on a preference.
Oh, yeah, I don't know. Was it Grant or Brant?
Grant.
Grant, okay, cool. Yeah, so do we calibrate to 100 nits for SDR, or do I go brighter? Personally, in my space, I go brighter. I think people have pointed out, probably some of you guys even here in grade school pointed out before, that like out in the wild, people aren't in controlled lighting environments generally, so that's part of it. But like even SDR displays come off the shelf these days at like 200-300 nits. So the 100 nits thing is a pretty arbitrary convention. For me, I like to calibrate to about 120 for a dark surround. I feel like that's plenty of like oomph. Like here in this room, I actually didn't calibrate this FSI because it comes factory calibrated, but like my client monitor is calibrated to around 120, and that's just my preference. And interestingly, there is nowhere anywhere that says 100 nits that's actually not a standard, it's a convention. So I used to like feel sort of sheepish about like, yeah, but can't I click it up a little bit, especially considering everyone else is going to be looking at a display way brighter than this anyway, even if I do click it up a little bit. And I used to feel a little bit like uneasy about that because I'm like, yeah, but I'm breaking the standard, aren't I? It's actually not a standard at all. BT 1886 has no standard for peak luminance whatsoever. So yeah, I go to 120. You should feel free to go to whatever level you like as well.
Ryan wants to know if you can tell us what you use for remote color grading sessions, streaming to clients, ensuring proper monitoring, etc.
Yeah, so I've used a couple different solutions. The question is, what do you use for running remote sessions? Like what software solutions do you use? I've more than any other solution, the one that I've logged the most time on is Zoom. Zoom's not perfect because you can't control the data rate, and there are other things that are kind of challenging about it. But I've done a lot of sessions on Zoom. That's still like the sort of like baseline that I'll encourage new colorists to. Like you can run a great session using Zoom. And I've actually been doing a more thorough roundup of the other solutions that are out there right now. Right now, I've been playing the most with a product called SetStream, which I really, really like. SetStream is good. Looper, you can get good results out of. I know colorists who do Looper, and Pixel View as well. There's some good solutions out there for getting like accurate color out to whatever your client is looking at the image on. And they like scale in wildly in terms of like what they offer and the cost there. There's other like much more high-end ones that I've never touched just because I'm like, it just doesn't, like I can find a cheaper solution, I feel like. But those are the ones that I've done the most with Zoom. I'm really liking SetStream at the moment. And then Looper and Pixel View, I've definitely done some initial like testing on, and they seem really promising as well.
Miranda wants to know if you look at footage before accepting a job, and when starting a project, do you use a reference directly based on a reference you get, or do you give it a blend of what you think it should look like?
Ooh, good questions. Yeah, so Miranda's asking, do I review footage before we say yes to the job or before we agree on a price and all the particulars there? And once agreed, am I working with references or more like sort of blending different references or just imparting something that I think looks cool? So these are like big sort of like core questions of a professional color grading practice. And some of these are things that we talk about at the full depth that they really deserve in the Colorist Career Accelerator course, which we do a couple times a year. We just wrapped a round of it not so long ago, and we'll be doing another one again here soon. So if you're interested, definitely encourage you to stay in the loop here on the channel and grab one of the freebies if you haven't already, my 2383 or my exposure chart, which we were talking about earlier. That way you can stay in the loop on the next round of that course if you're interested. But in terms of like general principles for navigating those questions, the first thing that I would say is like, for looking at footage, yes, absolutely. I can't remember ever accepting a job without looking at the rough cut. Like I may not be looking at the pristine, ungraded raw footage, but I at least need to see the rough cut for a variety of reasons. How long is it? How many cuts are there? How bumpy are the cuts? How good or terrible does it look right now? Like if it looks amazing, and like sometimes I'll have those projects where I'll look at it and be like, my legitimate question when I get on like the next call with that client will be like, what do you want to do here? Looks pretty good. Like, yeah, we can definitely do more, but like, what do you see? Like, where do you want to take this? So definitely necessary to review footage for all those reasons, for sure, even if it's not like the raw camera original footage. So that's a yes. And then in terms of working with references, that's all part of the collaboration. The client is going to bring their reference images in some cases. I may have references that come to mind that I might prep and say, hey, when I was looking at the footage, this came to mind. What do you think? Does that feel like a character or a quality you'd be interested in giving to your images. You know, we can kick things around in that regard. And sometimes it is as simple as like, hey, Cullen, we don't have any references, and I, Cullen, don't really have any references to bring to the table, and we just get in here and we grade, and I say, I don't know, what do you think about this? Let's add a little bit of contrast, maybe cool the shadow off a little bit, and like control the peak saturations. How does that feel for you? A little more contrast? Okay, cool. And we'll just kind of shape it on the images themselves. So it can take lots of different forms, but those are some of the sort of common paths that it can go down. All right, we got time for one or two more because we got started a little bit late.
All right. Brian's wondering if you can explain how to read a color cube and how the color cube can be helpful in look development.
Oh, yes, I can. We want to talk about color cubes, and I want to party with the color cube. I'm really glad this came up because we've got some really fun resources, offerings, content coming on look development, and I'm working with color cubes in the coming weeks and months. So this will be a great sort of like appetizer to some of those conversations. So for right now, if we want to look at a color cube, best way to do that natively for free is in Fusion. I'm going to build out a little working space here, working environment. If you want to follow along, you can feel free. I'm hitting Shift Spacebar, and I'm going to do a LUT Cube Creator. I'm going to hit Shift Spacebar again, create a media out. I'm going to tap 1 to send this LUT Cube Creator that I've just created to my first viewer portal here. And I'm going to set my views to 3D histogram. And then I'm going to set my 3D histogram to solid. I'm going to set my sampling to 1:1. So here is a 3D color cube, okay? All this is doing is expressing what's happening to my red, green, and my blue in 3 dimensions. And what's fun about a cube is a cube has 8 vertices, right? What's a vertex? It's just a corner of the cube, right? So there's 8 vertices that all correspond to a specific part of our image. We start with this corner. You can see it visually. This is black, right? Up here, this is white. If I kind of wrap you around over to this side. And if we want to, I'm going to do something that is a cornerstone of look development. I need to see what I'm doing on both my image and on my cube simultaneously. So I'm now able to do that. And let's just put a transform out to Rec 7 or 9 on the image itself. We're going to say Wide Gamut 3, Log C3, Rec 7 or 9, Gamut 2.4, Luminance Mapping, like so. So now we've got our output transform, and let's zoom in down here a little bit as well. All right, so if you want to get a sense for behavior of the cube, here's our first lesson in 3D cube geometry. I'm going to take my saturation all the way down. Does anybody want to guess, even just in your own mind, what will happen to this cube when I take my saturation to 0? Think about it for a sec. What's going to happen is I'm going to end up with a lightsaber, because now everything lives along this path from pure black to pure white. Okay? So those are 2 of my 8 corners of my vertices. The remaining 6, red, green, blue, cyan, magenta, yellow. And we can see those. If we look at the corners of the cube, I've got my blue down here. I've got my red up here. I've got my green over here. Mix my red and my green, I get yellow. Mix my red and my blue, I get magenta. Mix my green and my blue, I get cyan. Okay? So that's kind of the orientation of it. That's like the basic sort of like compass bearings. And what's fun is with practice, you can learn to read all kinds of interesting things in terms of operation on the cube. You know, like you can see some of these, they're very simple. Oh, if I do a global gain, the cube shrinks. If I do a lift, the bottom comes up. If I do an offset, which I don't have here, or maybe that's what brightness is. Yeah, brightness is an offset. The whole cube moves, right? So you can kind of intuit like how those basic operations are going to affect things. But we can also look at how does a LUT, like how does this Mars LUT from my Voyager pack affect my cube? Let's have a look. Now we can see how it affects the image and how it affects the cube over here, right? So you can see if we like sort of use this as an example of trying to read things. I'm just getting my bearings here, and I'm going to fade this off and on. So my red, my peak red is coming down, right? My magenta is coming in. My blue is coming in a little bit. My green is coming in, and it's rotating towards cyan. See that over here? Stuff that was here is now over here. Like so, moving towards cyan. So the principles are easy. Learning to intuitively read what you're seeing and to make heads and tails of it takes a little bit of practice. The main thing that I use a cube for, even if I'm not like reading things in detail, like what is happening to this cube, is I will use it as a way of sort of validating are nice things being done to my image, because this, I get much lower context here than I do here. This shows what will happen to all possible input pixels. This shows what happens to the pixels that I'm currently looking at. That's why the cube is so beneficial. And you can also use it to evaluate how is it going to affect all pixels, and is it going to do so smoothly? Does that make sense? So that's like 3D Cube 101. Like I said, glad this came up because we're going to be talking about it a lot more in the coming weeks and months as we start diving into look dev resources and education over the summer here. Okay, guys, I'm going to wrap us there. That was a really good session. Really good to be back with you guys after a month away. That's, I guess, the downside of our bi-weekly cadence is if I miss a week, then the whole thing gets shot. But regardless, really good to see you guys. Thanks to Gadali for co-hosting with me. I hope you guys have an awesome rest of your week, and I'll see you here on the channel super soon. Take care.